Good evening, everyone. My name is Simone Seidel, and I am the past chair of the Young Architects Forum, or YAF committee. This event has been organized by YAF, and the committee's mission is to provide opportunities for emerging architects to develop leadership skills within the AAA, to support and encourage young professionals to obtain licensure, and to foster fellowship in the industry through mentoring, social events, and volunteer opportunities. Tonight is the second part of an ongoing lecture series titled Invisible Frames. The series aims to build upon the discussions around racial and social injustices that have been happening at the national level as it relates to the architecture profession. It is intended to bring light on underrepresented design through a cultural frame of reference. After the presentation, there will be time for a facilitated discussion and questions from attendees for tonight's speaker. I am pleased to introduce our speaker, Anh Tran, who is a senior associate at Little, with a background in anthropology, architecture, visual art, and graphic design. Anh has dedicated her career to the integration of culture with the built environment. Her work in visioning, change management, ethnography, and analysis aids Little's design team in working with stakeholder and end user groups to understand organizational culture, organize patterns of behavior, and create a dialogue about how their spaces reflect unique mission and purpose. Anh leads Little's measurement efforts across its national footprint, helping Little's commercial, institutional, and educational clients define and measure the success of their existing and redesigned spaces in supporting critical operational and cultural goals. These interests also factor into her extracurricular activities. Anh has served on several work groups and advisory committees in the city of Alexandria, and led several community-based pro bono projects in the hopes of building stronger communities through better design. She is also a member of the AIA Northern Virginia Board of Directors and heads of the Communication Committee. I've personally gotten to know Anh over the few years from her involvement with YAF, and we are thrilled to have her give this presentation tonight. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Anh.
Thanks, guys. I'm super excited to be with you guys. Hopefully, I am an awkward human being, so hopefully this won't be as awkward as I am in real life, but I'm hoping I give you a taste of that experience. I really appreciate you guys taking time out of your holiday schedules to be here. Hopefully what you find is useful, and I look forward to the questions and the discussion afterwards. So my presentation is called Make Bad Choices, because that might actually be the theme for my career as a whole. And I actually think it's sort of a reflection of the narrow paths that a lot of us are expected to take over our lives. So we're going to talk a little bit about that and sort of talk about the ways in which, countering expectations can be good. So what are we doing here? I have a little list of notes here. I'm going to kind of go through a little bit about how I got to architecture, which is maybe slightly atypical, I think. What I do, what I work on. I also kind of hate talking about myself. So, I want this to be a conversation. I want this to be a jumping off point for you guys to tell me how I can help you, how we can help each other, and how it kind of, the experience of being a designer and being an architect intersects with your own personality and your own history, and the ways in which we kind of end up filtering that out or incorporating it as the opportunity presents. So we'll start with this. Meet baby Anh. Look at that face. So cute, so angry. I still make that face in meetings. This is true. Most of the people who've worked with me have seen it. Usually happens right around construction. But so I am the daughter of two Vietnamese immigrants who came over in the 70s during and after the Vietnam War. So it's kind of an interesting thing, right? To be the child of sort of dislocated immigrants is always an experience in disconnection. I would say that I didn't know, or it's like I knew Vietnamese food, but I didn't have any real connection to my Vietnamese heritage for a really long time. Not in a way that I think resonated in a real sense, and it was like I lived a lot of the rituals and a lot of the sort of surface level stuff, but never really had that sort of sense of Vietnamese-ness. It was always being Asian American. It was always being Vietnamese American. And I was kind of like a intense, weird little kid as I've turned into an intense, weird adult. And that was kind of a thing that I think my parents were not really equipped for, was this intersection between your kids having this American experience and sort of trying to resolve that within the context of your own history and your own heritage and your own sense of loss from being moved 3,000 miles around the world, you know? So to me, a lot of these things that you see on screen that I was like really obsessed with buildings as a small child and really like into drawing like fantasy worlds and fantasy cities and stuff. To me as an adult now, I was like, parents probably should have picked up on that. No frame of reference, eh? Cool, that's fine. Let's move on. And so we're going to talk about my family a little bit just to set the stage for this life experience that gets you to architecture. My adorable 80s family. You know, Asian kids often are expected to fit a set of roles within their families. As we can see, got a lot of finance kids in here. No engineers, don't know how that happened. Wellness, real estate, HR, these are all great jobs, right? You're the kid of immigrants, you go off to college, you find a stable job, you make money. What in the world, in this context, is this little designer trying to do, right? You know, there's this expectation at an early age that you're going to conform. You're going to get good grades. You should probably play some kind of instrument. That might be a good call. It'd be good if you played a sport. It'd be great if you got into UVA. That would be nice. That's like the ne plus ultra of like little Virginia kids, right? Got to get into UVA. Be well-rounded. I did none of those things. It was horrifying. Literally every other kid in the family got straight A's. I think I failed art my senior year twice. And was a little too artsy, a little too much for my family, right? So that culminated senior year. You're gonna get lots of baby Ann pictures because it's just hilarious. I got most artistic, failed art twice. I don't know what. I think it's the award they give you when you're just weird. And so that was kind of like this moment, right? Because senior year, I think by the time that you guys hit senior year, you probably had a sense that you were going to go to architecture school. Like you probably had this feeling that you're like, okay, I'm ready to commit. I'm ready to do my 4 to 5 years of A school and then go off and draw. And at this point, I really didn't have that sense. So I kind of looked around, was looking for what I was going to do, you know, and at no point in my high school career, despite being artsy, despite being in theater, despite being one of those kids who's constantly breaking things and putting it back together, who loves physics, who loves drawing things and like is very technical about stuff sometimes. Nature abhors vacuum. There was no point at that in that process where anybody presented architecture to me as an option. And I went to Fairfax County schools, right, which are pretty well funded. They have a lot of programs. Nobody ever suggested drafting. Everybody sort of said, well, you're artsy and you're very nerdy. And, you know, maybe the thing for you to do is look at an art school. So I looked at art schools and I had this feeling. I knew that I wanted to go into design. I knew somehow that my future was going to be in design. I just didn't know what form it was going to take. And I didn't feel like I had anyone to talk to, either in my own family or in my own school, to sort of help guide me there, right? It was a really weird experience. And I think that like you sort of think about the ways in which kids get tagged really early in a very simple set of parameters, and it sort of dictates the way that they're treated throughout their education, you know? Because I mean, if you look at this picture, this guy and I, most artistic, this is what ended up happening to us. He's literally an energy expert with a PhD in mechanical engineering, you know, and I'm whatever I am. But it sort of speaks to the ways in which like having this sort of limited perspective sort of imposed on you by people who know better makes it a lot tougher to sort of find your place later or earlier. So, you know, I'm nerdy, I have decent grades. That wasn't entirely, I didn't totally screw up high school, you know, came out with like a 4.0-ish. Those bonus AP, that bonus credit you get for AP, very helpful. You know, and I end up spending 4 years at William & Mary. I get a degree in anthropology, which I fell in love with. Thankfully stopped me from trying to become Fox Mulder. That was an option too. I was like, if I'm an English major, I could go into the FBI, right? That would also have been really dumb. you know, and I spent 4 years at William & Mary. It's great. I love it, but it still doesn't really feel right. I'm still thinking about design like all the time. And I did the same things at William & Mary that I did in high school. Did theater, did costume design, did volunteered for every like set building crew, like wanted to take things apart. Always, I think I built things in our dorm room constantly. Like at one point I built our lofts. That was also a terrible idea. No one should let anyone do that. It's very unsafe. But I was like, we can just go to Home Depot. I know how to use 2x4s. I learned how to build stuff and use power tools. It's fine. It's fine. So I spent a year after college kind of mucking around. I interned for an interior design firm. Doesn't fit. It's getting closer though, right? We're getting warmer. I spent a year doing marketing for a real estate firm. Lots of fun, still close, still not quite there. And then in basically what amounts to a giant FU to my very traditional Asian parents, I decided to move to Japan with my boyfriend. Great idea for me, terrible idea for what was expected of me. Like, I think my mom was on the verge of like not talking to me for like 2 months. She's like, how dare you? You heathen. You're so bad. So inappropriate, bring shame. But it worked out. But somewhere in there, in sort of seeing the environments, you know, and so like being somewhere that's familiar and alien at the same time is either an opportunity to have things be clarified or for things to be further obfuscated, right? And in my case, it made things a lot clearer. Like I traveled around Asia. I was gone for like 8 months. And it was just sort of constantly refining the experience of like what I wanted to do with myself, you know? So I saw people behave in ways that were pretty different from the ways that we behave in space, because spaces are smaller, they're different. The relationship that people have to them just doesn't echo the way that we act here, where it's, you know, it's like even an apartment building, like your tiny studio apartment is like 2 Japanese apartments. So it was a really good experience in that sense. And so I'm sitting there on a rooftop in Japan somewhere. And I think I turned to my boyfriend and I was like, spoiler alert, we're married now. I turned to him and I was like, I think the call is architecture. And he was like, what? And I was like, yeah, I think that's going to be the plan. He was like, are you sure? And I was like, well, I mean, you know, I'm not sure, but we'll find out. Like, what's the worst that could happen? That was a bad thing to say. You should never say that. What's the worst that could happen? You know, and that sort of starts the spiral. So we come back to the US. It's very important. What are those? Does anybody recognize those? Anyone? Bueller? P.F. Chang's lettuce wraps? Very important to the story because I get back to the US and I just have this moment where I'm like, oh my God, I have no freaking idea how to get started going into architecture. Like, what am I going to do? You know, so I'm waitressing at a P.F. Chang's. Key. Now you're hungry. And kind of like moonlighting basically anywhere I can get, you know. So I've started to look at design schools. I've started to look at what are the opportunities for a weirdo who did this in entirely the wrong order to re-enter the field. And I have a chance meeting. A guy who my dad knows comes by because my dad wants to sell a car. And we're just talking. And I happen to be the one home. So my dad's like, you need to stay home. He's going to come get the keys and take it for a test drive, you know, talk to him, whatever. And he's an architect. And I was like, you're an architect. Tell me about your life. Tell me things. Allow me to enter your glorious world. And we talked for a while. And he says, you know who you need to talk to? My friend Carol at Little. And that's pretty much it. That's how I sneak my weird self into design. Like, you know, Trojan horse all the way in. I'm like, hi, I'll do anything. I'm 24. You don't have to pay me a lot. It's cool. Just let me do anything. You know, and a decade later, here we are. So from there, I've sort of built a weird little career that has combined my expertises that Simone mentioned into something roughly resembling an architectural career, I think. I do have kind of an innate response to visualizing information. I'm pretty good with metrics and data, you know? And so if you're thinking about how humans react to space and thinking about how to objectively analyze the ways in which we respond to space and whether or not the design that we do really affects people the way that we think it does, it's really important to start combining those elements, right? Like your sense of architectural space, your sense of humans, your sense of people's movement and behavior and joy and pleasure or hatred for your space as it goes. So that's kind of been the focus of my career as we've gone on. You know, I've spoken a lot about how incremental steps in design can provide a big return, like whether or not there's variety, whether there are opportunities for customization or altering your space to suit your needs. What's the impact of that? What's choice mean, right? What's preference mean? And it's been a lot of fun. It's actually been a really huge adventure to sort of get to know the experience of humans in space a little bit better and have all of these opportunities to investigate it more closely. And so it's led to me being able to span a lot of different project types, right? Like I've touched K through 12 schools, I've touched workplaces, I've touched colleges and universities, headquarters, a little bit of urban planning, sometimes new models for things. I get to investigate what choices we made and what difference it made to the people around it. But it's always been a little strange to be in architecture in some ways, like to be the other. There aren't a lot of people like me, both in terms of my background and in terms of my education. And we will revisit the education point in just a few. There aren't a lot of people who necessarily respond to space the same way that I sort of intrinsically do. And there hasn't necessarily been a lot of opportunity to have these sort of weird discussions about like, you know, why are you making this choice? What is it supposed to do for the client, right? Like, what is it supposed to do for the end user? What's the impact it's going to have? Not in the way that people sort of are willing to dive into. They're like, well, we know, or we expect that this will be the outcome, right? But there's never, well, I shouldn't say never. There's not a lot of opportunity to go back and investigate that theory a lot of the time. You don't get to test it after it's done 9 months later and be like, for real, did this work out the way I thought it did? Did more people start talking to each other? Did you see higher levels of collaboration? Did you see more productivity? Are your people happier? You know, so I've been really grateful for those opportunities. The other things that have happened as a result of this are being able to sort of extend it into communities. Like design tends to be for people who can pay for it. Yeah. And that's kind of an unfortunate side effect of the way that our industry is structured and the way that we approach a lot of it. So being able to take the sort of things that I've learned and sort of refined and tested and work with a lot of different people, and then being able to take the people in the firm who are willing to do this and bring it out into our communities and talk about like, you know, what is the vision for this community? What would this community like to see happen? The pictures that you see up there are partnerships that we've done with Rebuilding Together, DC Alexandria. Like there's a weird sort of joy in like teaching 40 people who don't know how to use power tools, how to build millwork. It's really fun, highly recommend. And it's very fulfilling in a way that sitting at your computer all day is not necessarily. But turning something like this and being able to ask teenagers like, what kind of teen center would you want? You know, what kind of space do you want to be in? Do you really just want to play Fortnite for 40 hours? Okay, that's fine. I can design towards that. And turning it into that. You know, these little wins are like the kinds of things that make up for every time I have to think about a toilet partition. Maybe that's me. But, you know, and it turns into these things that you just know that you made something slightly more pleasant for someone. And that's kind of a goal. Like this is another rec center that we did pro bono. We just did graphic language, you know, just something really quick to connect it to the community. And just something as simple as that. And once again, teaching a lot of people who didn't know how to paint, also a plus. Hopefully they take that home to their spouses. Do a solid. That's the kind of stuff that, sorry, I'll go back to that in a sec. That has been really fulfilling throughout my career. So my career's been kind of a hodgepodge, right? It's been kind of a mashup. So I've been lucky in a lot of ways and had opportunities, I think. But we're going to talk about how we can possibly be luck for other people. That's after this. So this is the final thing. Over this entire decade of work, I also somehow managed to get my Master of Architecture. And I bring this up because working full-time and going to A school sucks. Do not recommend. Probably the worst choice I've ever made, but it was a necessary one. Because I came into architecture with a fully fledged life. I had a house I needed to pay for. I had student loans from my previous degree. It wasn't really tenable for me to not be working while I was in A school. And I think that's something that we need to talk about in general, because the academic experience of architecture, I think, can be really difficult when you're somebody who comes from a background similar to mine. I think I talked about it earlier about how like my parents had no context. Like they were educated, like reasonably educated. My mom never had a high school education. My dad was an engineer, so he was ahead of her, but it still wasn't culturally appropriate, I guess, for him to think about the possibility that his daughter could become an architect. So there wasn't really, this is a hard thing to parse. It's like they supported me, but they didn't know how to. And that's still true. Like I'm an adult who's been in the field for a decade and my parents still don't exactly know what I do. My mom's like, so houses? And I'm like, no, everything except that. Not the houses, definitely not the houses. And you know, my grandparents, my aunts, my uncles, like at family dinner's gonna get real awkward. They're like, so what are you working on? I was like, you really want to talk about it? You sure? Do you want to talk about this headquarters that we're redesigning and I'm conducting the metrics for, you know, 5,000 people? So that starts off as a limiter, right? And then you move on to that, and you move after that and you go into high school. And depending on how you've been depicted at certain points in your academic career in high school, like that can really affect whether or not other doors open to you. I think, you know, there's a lot of question about like, when is it appropriate to be introduced to architecture? And I do think that there's something about the academy itself that can make it really tough. Because once I finally got to my master's, um, it was super difficult, like especially after going through undergrad. I felt like I was speaking a different language all the time, and which was really hard for me on an intuitive level, because I think there's a lot that anthropology and architecture share. You know, they're both sort of meaningless without humans. And to me, what anthropology and architecture both constitute is new ways of seeing. You know, I'm constantly learning to see. And that was part of my anthropological career. And that was part of that has been very much been part of my architectural career, is always looking for new ways to see and to learn. You know, you refine your ability to see through your exposure to other things. So it was really rough to come into my first year of my master's and have a professor sort of say, what are you doing here? Because it kind of reinforced the way I'd felt about a lot of things. You know, there was always this sense of being the other. First, you're the other because you're an Asian kid in a predominantly white elementary school. Then you're the other because your food's weird, or you're the other because your name's weird. There's just, it starts to layer up, you know? So when you get to the academy and there aren't a whole lot of professors who look like you, there aren't people who are necessarily sharing their stories until you're at the master's level, where people are like comfortable talking about where they came from. And you don't have necessarily the sense of community, especially if you're an interloper with an MArch3. So that's a discussion that I think you need to have about like what it's like to welcome people into a diverse experience and to welcome diverse experiences and build a better community of support out of it. So we're going to go back to this because this is kind of my ethos for basically everything right now. And that's why you should make bad choices, because those bad choices help other people make good choices, right? Because we all learn through pain. And the ability to have this discussion, which we're going to have in a couple seconds, kind of helps us decide how we can help each other. So I'm going to stop sharing so that we can have a talk about this, but I'm going to outline some of the key things that I think are important to the kinds of objectives that YAF has laid out for the series. There's been a lot of talk about, you know, lack of diversity and how it continues, right? Because it's kind of a multidimensional problem. We have a lack of diversity in our students, we have a lack of diversity in our leadership, and we have a lack of diversity in the kinds of clients and people that we sort of encounter on a regular basis, which can lead to some real awkward moments. I mean, we can talk about like microaggressions as sort of a baseline order of business. I cannot tell you how many times I've been told that my English is so good, but it sucks every single time. So, you know, don't let people do that to you. Try to come up with a road answer is my suggestion. Like, I've tried to be real flippant about this because I think it's also kind of mean, where great, this is on YouTube. Where I'm like, is there a reason my English shouldn't be good? You know, and then you just wait for a couple of beats. And usually somebody will sputter and be like, oh, well, like, I don't know, you're just, and I was like, don't make it worse. So that's one of the issues that we should probably talk about like tonight in building a community. The other things are, you know, how to make sure people feel supported. As I was saying, I felt super alone in school. Like, I had this community of people at work who were like willing to let me talk about them, but it's like, it really ratchets up your imposter syndrome to be in both environments at once. You're like, I'm utterly competent at work, I'm pretty sure. I just made associate and then senior associate, so I can't be a total idiot. But then you go into crit and you're like, I think I might be a total idiot. Cool, 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 cool. Gonna spend a lot of money to be a total idiot. Great. So that's another thing that we probably should talk about in terms of building a career as a young architect, right? Like how many times have you wandered into something and just been like, well, went to school for 5 years, feel dumber coming out. That's another one. The other thing is, you know, leveraging your experiences and your history and your heritage and your background is occasionally really hard. Like from the point in which you enter school, you know, you're really being exposed to sort of Western conceptions of architecture. We talk about classical architecture. We talk about history in the Middle East. We talk about the beautiful buildings and, you know, the radiant city of Paris. But it doesn't leave you a whole lot of room to start getting excited about the things that might come from your families, from your communities. Like, I've talked about this a little bit with like Simone and Lara, but there's a Vietnamese architect who's awesome. His work is like modernist, it's gorgeous, it's about materiality, it responds to context. His name is Vo Trong Nghia, which I'm not going to ask anybody to repeat. And in fact, my Vietnamese is also terrible, so don't emulate me. But every time I see his name come up in Architizer, I'm like, yes, I have no idea who you are, but it doesn't matter because you're Vietnamese and I like it. But, you know, the ability to sort of use that as a frame of reference, right? Like you don't get that as a student. Nobody's saying, hey, you know, go ahead, investigate your own connections. If you want to, make it part of your thesis, who knows? Like there's a lot of different ways this could be expressed, where from the point at which you enter the academy and become someone who can learn about architecture and really participate in it, where you can be an advocate, or where your professors can advocate for you, or if you're an instructor, you can be someone who encourages people to explore things that aren't conventional or that aren't part of received wisdom, you know, and then being able to kind of iterate that back out into the world. Like when you get invited to be a juror, being like, hey, so you should go check out this cool Vietnamese architect. His stuff's real sweet. Check out that internal courtyard. It's hot. Or depending on what other elements you like, you know, like there's vernacular that we don't get to explore and that makes us feel a little bit perhaps more disconnected from the diversity that is inherent to us. So I think there's a question there about how we cultivate that approach to diversity as a way to enhance thinking and to enhance observation and to just make us stronger designers as a whole. The other thing that I think comes up is it's really tough and awkward to find mentorship, I think, just as a whole. And I'd love to hear your perspectives on this. Like, I think, you know, you enter this sort of complex environment where communicating with other people from other firms is almost like betrayal. Like sometimes, right? Like unless there's a facilitated environment in which you can do that. Like either you've met each other through AIA or you've met each other through AIS or YAF or some other sort of industry approved grouping of people, right? But it's kind of like very rarely do you hear someone say, you know what, I have a colleague at a different firm who will be a safe space for you, right? Or who has life experiences that are similar to yours and could possibly be someone who you can bounce things off, you know? You get lost trying to find the right people, like trying to say, and you when you hear about someone super cool, right, you have this feeling that they're probably getting bombarded. Like, am I really going to email this person out of the blue and be like, hi, would you like to meet for coffee? I would love to pick your brains about the paths my career could take, right? That's like basically death by a thousand cuts. You're like, I'm ashamed. Why am I sending this email? So I think that's on us, like as a community, and that's an opportunity to sort of lower those thresholds, to sort of talk about the ways in which we can help each other, where we can be more honest and be more vulnerable, not in a weird way, but in a really productive way that talks about, like, you know, how do you bring your full self to design in a way that strengthens you and strengthens the people around you? And I wanted to bring that up because I think there are key points in my own personal narrative where a lot of times I've said this, and it's kind of a lazy way to think about it, where I'm like, I was really lucky. I was really lucky. And luck is not really the case, I think, for us. I think that the ways in which our careers occur, they're difficult enough that luck isn't the issue. It's that somebody helped us. Somebody stepped in at that key point to make themselves available or to give something of themselves. You know, my master's experience improved immensely when I picked my committee, like, because now I had this relationship with people who were kind of, I'd picked for reasons, you know, like we had this resonance. So having a couple of professors be like, you don't belong here, didn't feel as true when there were people who were like, it's not that you don't belong here, it's that you're doing this wrong. I was like, okay, that's better. I can understand that and respect it. And now I can feel like I'm getting somewhere. But if I hadn't had those key people step in, like when I was looking for a job or when I was trying to think through how I was going to map school into my workload, you know, like it would have been untenable. I probably would have just left. Like at a certain point, it's just the cost benefit analysis for your mental and emotional health becomes screw it. And I think we don't want to see that happen to young professionals. We don't want people to hit that screw it point and exit the industry when they could have so much to offer from who they are and what they can do and the things they'll learn and the things they'll teach, right? So I think that's part of the planning that we as a community have to do, is like to take these factors about expecting everybody to be just the same way, which I think is actually part of the experience, right? Like you're going to have this really set career path. You're going to come in as a baby architect. You're going to take your AREs. You're going to get licensed. If you don't decide to get licensed, then you've taken this fork and that's what's up, you know? And you're going to be a project manager. Then you'll be a principal. Then you'll be a partner. And then you'll retire and be glorious in your old age and opine deeply on some historical review board. Yay. Congratulations. That I don't think is what we want to build for each other. I think we should be imagining a better future, right? I think we should be thinking about this immensely diverse set of possibilities for all of us, where we can have deep impact and affect change. So I want people to sort of embrace the idea that there's no right way to do it, that the way you do it is equally worthy, you know? And I mean, like, don't fail out of things. Like, let's not get crazy here. But if you're excited and you're passionate and you've just taken some weird detours, there's still a place for you in design. And you're going to make design better because you'll have been exposed to all of these different things and had an opportunity to think critically, you know? And that's something that I just think is really important for young architects to hear, right? Just because you didn't take this path that was perfect doesn't mean you're not good, doesn't mean you're not capable, doesn't mean you can't continue getting better and better. Like, you're probably gonna screw up a couple times along the way. We all do. It's fine. It's fine. Drop an F-bomb in front of a client, recoverable. I can promise that. Not gonna tell you when that happened. But I will tell you that my principals had whipped around from across the room. Still employed. A-okay. But there's things like that, you know, that like, if you didn't have a good relationship with your boss or your mentor internal to the firm, you'd be kind of at a loss. You wouldn't be able to get that feedback. You wouldn't have a place to turn. Because even like with an organization or a committee like YAF, right, which is awesome, and you guys do amazing work, it's not quite the same as having somebody who's a little bit more experienced tell you you'll make it, like it's a great place to share experiences and learn from each other at like a similar experience level. But there's not a culture of encouraging people to go find that higher level unless we facilitate it. So that's pretty much the end of my talky bits. I will facilitate a discussion quite happily now. And I really want to start with that question of like, for you guys, if you have any questions for me, go ahead and start there. But otherwise, I'd love to hear about how everyone on this call has been able to bring or hasn't been able to bring their full selves to their experience of design.
Yeah, I was gonna say, people just want to feel free to unmute themselves and speak, or if you have questions, to type those in the chat.
Okay, Anne, could I jump in first?
Yeah.
I have a few comments to make, and I'll eventually get to the mentoring and the assumptions and society that we all have. So if I don't, if I get too verbose and don't cover those, then re-ask those for me. Very, very entertaining. Your creativity is just amazing. This is one of the best presentations I've seen in a while. I tell you the truth, I was sitting here with some work to do. It's okay, I'll listen in. Maybe I'll get a CEU for this, but I absolutely put down what I was going to do to listen to you. So I absolutely love your creativity. So kudos to you. Good job. You know, I would make no apologies for your career. You know, you and I have talked. My daughter has gone to. She's a fellow tribe member. So you and I have talked in the past about the undergrad in Williamsburg. So that's totally okay. What I think Laura knows this, I had presented kind of my variegated experience at the YAF thing for Visions 2020, you know, which I think we as architects really do have a varied career path, you know, whether it's on both sides of the fence. And that's totally okay, because I think it molds a very creative, very competent, very very great set of skills to really be effective as a designer. And I've come full circle, and I'm back to, you know, doing design and doing what I love to do in my world. So I think your presentation was very, very effective. I still kind of leave this as a bit of rhetoric. I want to know, if you took the washer away or apart, did you ever put it back together? You know, is that why you went into architecture and not engineering? So I'll kind of leave that one alone. But
did put it back together, but there was one extra screw, so maybe that's why I'm an architect.
Okay, I got it. So getting back to the kind of where I was going with these comments and these questions, the assumptions you made about, boy, your English is pretty good. I tell you, that woke me up, and that hits home, because it really makes us, you know, as a part of society, realize those comments are just inappropriate, you know, but we don't realize we're making those, you know. And you know, me as a an old white guy in this world of white guys, you know, for my whole career, I really think this is a tremendous opportunity to explore this, to pursue this, to fix this, and deal with the diversity that I think is, you know, so heavily on everybody's mind in the past 6 months or so, or if not year or before. So a last comment, and then I'll shut up, about the mentorship. I think that's what we owe to our clients. I'm sorry, to, well, our clients, yes, to all people in our industry. I have taken that on very much to help as many of the students as I can over at the WAG, just, you know, by convenience, because I'm involved in the boards. So I feel very, very strongly about mentorship and doing what I can about giving back to our industry what we've done. But at the same time, much of the reason I'm engaged with education still is because, you know, it's lifelong learning. I am continuing to learn. Everyone I talk to, current students, you know, recent graduates, you know, young practitioners, you know, old white guys, you know, everybody I'm always learning from, because, you know, that's what this profession is about. So with that, I will leave it with you for kudos. I think you were very, very effective. It definitely reached me, so I will be looking forward to more dialogue. So I'll shut up now. Thank you.
No, thank you, Mari. I like the good feedback. You know, I'm like ready to be super awkward up in this space. But I do think you bring up a really good point about those meetings, right? This is kind of an issue that I think we we need to plan for and train people for better is how do you lend power? Because there's sort of layers of power that we accumulate over our careers where you develop trust with a client or with as an intermediary to your leadership, right? It always bummed me out in meetings where that happened, where I had to speak for myself and I wasn't necessarily ready to, especially as a younger architect. Like, there's a point at which, like, I'm sassy as a whole, and we know this, but sassing a client at the first meeting, not usually something that is embraced, right? And so that's the tough part, right? Like, now I'm like, whatever, I'm like older and I don't care as much. So let's set a tone here. But I think as a 20 something, I really wanted my leader or my PM to step in and know that that person had my back in a way that it didn't have to be like confrontational, right? You just need to feel supported. And I think that's something that we have to sort of normalize how you cope with that, like letting people ask in the face of diversity, right? Like in the face of the diversity challenges we're facing, how do you support someone that way? How do you make it so that someone doesn't feel like they didn't just get othered in a meeting and nobody noticed and nobody checked on them and nobody was like, are you all right? Not that the English question is like the most thing, but there have been other instances where someone has made assumptions about me that I thought were wildly inappropriate, or just really offensive, even at a professional level, like when you wander into something and somebody is like, oh, hey, you can get us coffee. And I'm like, actually, I'm leading this meeting, so you can get your coffee yourself, right? Like, that sucks. You don't want to have that sort of vibe come in. Like, you don't want to set that tone because you're trying to have a good relationship, one that's going to span an entire project. So that's kind of the thing that I think we can talk about, like as AIA, as YAF, as mentoring groups, as leaders, as people who are experiences. How do I support you better? How do I think about you and have that empathy for your experience when it's needed, and sort of just turn it into a small habit that I'm here, I'm listening, and I saw that. Michael has a question. Michael, do you want to unmute?
Sure. I really appreciated your comments about the power sharing and like lending power. And one thing you said earlier about like you walked into the space and were like, are there people like me here? And feeling like there aren't people like me here. I'm just curious about, as someone, when I thought about the question, I was like, I've generally been able to answer that question. And that is like an advantage I have found in the architecture profession, at least my experience of it. So I'm just want to open it up to hear and learn from other people about how you may or may not have answered that question, like in the day to day, and specifically thinking about like how does that like address some idea about like lending power, about like finding people like you and supportive people, even if they're the same or different than you.
I think you can give support to people no matter what your background is by seeing them and sort of like being able to see the difference between their experience and yours. And that gives you sort of a hint of where you can lend power, right? But I think there's also a question there about pressure a lot of the time. And this does come back to the idea of making bad choices, right? Sometimes in the way that we relate to each other and to our clients and stuff, there is a certain pressure to not speak, I think. Like, oh, don't rile up the client, right? Like, don't rile up this person, don't offend that person. And it's kind of a weird knife, right? A weird Occam's razor to apply, that there's this line where you don't offend people, as if offense is the thing that's going to result from that, as opposed to improvement. You're setting a boundary. You're not starting a fight necessarily. So I think that was something that when you're trying to look for people who are like you or have similar experiences, they don't have to be exactly like you to lend power and to have an experience that resonates. It has something to do with sharing your story. And I don't mean like dominating a conversation, but just sort of being willing to say, I've been through that. Like, school also sucked for me, or something, even something as little as that can be really helpful. Because I think, and I'd love to hear other people speak about this, I think there's a lot of pressure that gets built up over time, like especially if you're from a diverse background or whatever. But you're always expected to be like the representative you have to be the perfect one. Like, I got to be the best, like, Vietnamese American architect anybody's ever seen, you know, because there's not a lot of us. So making space for imperfection, welcoming other people's stories, and sort of being able to say like, oh yeah, I had a tough time. Because I've had this conversation a couple of times with like people in the past where I've been pretty blunt about it. I was like, school sucked for like, architecture school sucked for me for the first year. I felt like a complete fish out of water. And there's a difference in the response being something like, oh, I could totally see that. Like, even if your school experience was fine, like, but being able to see that is so much better than someone being like, really? It was tough for you? It was so easy for me. Everybody loved me. My designs are so good. My professors think that like, I'm brilliant. I'm going to be like the next Frank Gehry. It's amazing, you know? And that's like that thing about like me. There's so much potential for us to be like each other if we're willing to acknowledge that.
Well, I think sharing power can also be unspoken as well. An example for me is normally I am the only woman in the room, and normally everybody's expecting somebody a lot older. And even though, you know, as an Asian American, we look a lot younger than sometimes we are, that has an intimidation factor where you're feeling like you've got to act older, or you've got to look more experienced or whatever. And you know, it is what it is. And so over time, you know, as I've gone, you know, into the practice longer, it's easier to just not even care about that. But, you know, when you're younger and starting out, you do. And so I was in a meeting with mostly men, the principals in the office, and I had brought another young woman with me, and they all sat down to start talking about something after a presentation. There was one seat left, 2 women. What do you do? I stood with that girl the whole time. I was like, you know, we're going to stand here together then, because, you know, I'm not going to sit and make you be the one standing by yourself. And I guess I could have asked, hey, could you get another chair in here? But I mean, it was more like, let's just, you know, I can't do anything else to support you other than stand here with you. I'm not going to take this last chair and make you the one person just standing here. So I think a lot of times, you know, it's hard when you're younger and you're the only woman or the inexperienced person in the room or whatever, but like, I wasn't going to make it that much harder for her because, you know, she was, you know, like there was enough chairs. So I think we all can try to do what we can. That's just one small instance, but I still work with that person. And I think even though it was kind of an unspoken thing, there's just that I got your back always kind of, you know, mentality that she knows that I'm there for her now. And I think just being able to do, you know, small things like that. You talk about microaggressions. I'm completely on board with you and I understand that, but there's also micro kindnesses that you can also throw out there and let people know that, you know, you're not gonna take the last chair.
Well, but that's like another point though. I mean, you brought her to the meeting, and I think that's also something that we tend to not do as well, just across the industry, right? Where you're taking people to get exposed. I think we get wound up a lot, right? In the pragmatics, like, oh, this is going to be another billing hour. This sucks. But I think you have to advocate for people to see that, especially as you're developing and growing your career. Like, people need to say, okay, like, even if you don't say anything, like, you're there to observe. And it's also one of those things where the way that you introduce someone and the way that you talk about someone lends a lot of context, right? It's
well,
so
even introducing that person, you know, not like this is an invisible person here, but this is la 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 la, she's from our office, whatever. But you know, they still exist and they're a person. So
but the other thing is that, like, to your point, right, like, you have to acknowledge that person, but you also have to make it seem like they're valued in front of other people. And anybody who has Asian parents knows about your Asian parent saying lovely things about you when you're not in the room, and then you walk back in and they're like, she's a monster, she's my least favorite child, you know? And that's like not what you want to do to your baby designers. You want to be like, this is a valuable member of our team. This person, like, you know, she's here to observe right now, he's here to observe right now, but they're going to be really intrinsic to what we do later. That is a cool way to introduce a young person to a career and make them feel like they have a place in this industry, as opposed to being like, well, he just drafts things, he's really good with Revit, you know? Like, if you describe somebody as their skill set and not as their person, that kind of sucks. Let's not do that.
I also, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Michael. I've already talked.
I was going to say it's super intriguing to me to hear you talk about that. And one thing I'm like reflecting on ways that has happened naturally to me. And I'm pretty sure it's just because I look the way I do. Like I was introduced as someone with like credibility, right? Like one time I was the only person there at the end of a meeting with the like managing partner and one of the decision makers. And that I was trying to think, that's like the small ways that it builds up, right? Like if you're wondering like how certain people sort of end up in front, that's where it happens, right? How do you like transfer that down is to just like, it's like the small ways that end up, you know, for me, I feel like it's like, it gave me credibility that I don't necessarily feel like I always need or have.
There's so much imposter syndrome available in this industry already. We don't need to make it worse for each other.
Yeah, and so I'm trying to reflect on that as like how to then do that for other people, right? We were talking about it in our office about how to do that for, you know, a group of women and leaders, and like how to bring in young designers who aren't necessarily thinking and looking like you, and like how to transfer that down. I really appreciate the comment about like making introductions and like showing people that like that everyone at the table deserves to be there, right? And then if the person somehow doesn't make it to the table, it's like elbow out a spot for them to be there to show them that. I really appreciate that note about the introducing people as a way of really bringing them like specific weight.
It's definitely like, and it's really funny because it is overlooked so often, right? Like because you have like a meeting that has like 10 people in it or something, and you just like, it feels like a waste of time. And it doesn't have to be that formalized or that rigid. It's really just acknowledging that this human here for a reason.
Let me jump in, and I very much appreciate that anecdote. And I'm trying to put maybe the hat on the people in the room when the musical chairs were presented with one available seat. I'm trying to put a hat on as another perspective on that. Maybe, and again, I'm guilty of the older white male in the industry, but I'm just wondering if the thought was, let's not try to clear out the chair so that all the women can sit. You know, was it you know, I mean, it sounds like a very awkward moment, but you know, I'm just trying to think that's what they were thinking. I mean, I grew up with a mother and a sister who never let me realize that you know, males have any power other than, you know, than they do. So, you know, I'm very much not from that ilk at all. So I'm just trying to put my understand really kind of where they were coming from in that room, because I'm not that way at all. So I mean, it's
and honestly, I'm not taking it like it's not wounded me for life. It was just something that happened, and you know, sometimes you just got to move on. It was like we were meeting, we were showing presentation material, so we were standing, and then you know, the owner had a very limited amount of time, so then it was like, okay, let's just sit and talk about it really quick. And so at that time, it could have been, you know, something where, you know, it's like, well, could we get one more chair? Which I didn't say, but at the same time, I was like, I'm not going to take the chair. So let's, you know, I'll stand here and we'll talk and we can look and I'll still respond. It's just like, so I don't think there was anything extra that I wanted to like get out of it, you know, or necessarily assume that they were, you know, not thinking about us in the same way. I think it was just, you know, maybe it's just easy to overlook people. I don't know. It's, you know,
I think that's what it comes down to, is that it's really easy to be thoughtless, and thoughtlessness perpetuates the cycle.
Yeah. So, because I mean, these are both people that were in the office that, you know, I felt respected me and all that. It was just, I don't know if the client also intimidated them because, you know, they also wanted to focus on what he wanted to talk about in that short limited amount of time. And so they just like got down to business or whatever. So
I think that's something worth bringing up though. It's that the ways in which we construct this idea that every architect is an island unto themselves, right? There's not a whole lot that we do alone. But that's also a strength for us, theoretically, is that there's a way to be together, right? Like to support each other, to be a team, to be a community that like doesn't necessarily come naturally, you know, to the ways that we think about what the process looks like. And I think that kind of ends up crippling us sometimes, right? To be really like, oh, I'm going to do this myself. I will work the 12 hours that it takes to get here, right? Like it starts to leave you without the bandwidth to start thinking about the other things that you need to do to make the profession stronger, because you're getting so burnt on your own that thinking about other people gets tougher, you know? So that's the other thing that I think affects some of this structural issue in thoughtlessness, is that like when you're so consumed with like, got to get the project done, got to hit this deadline, got to do this, got to do whatever, it just makes it harder to think ahead.
I also think we're evolving, and I hope more people are into a more self-aware atmosphere, you know, about, you know, how what you do at work or what you say or how you present yourself does impact other people. I think empathy is becoming much more mainstream, which, you know, it shouldn't be, but it is, you know what I mean? So as we are learning from experiences from other folks and all that, I think it really is helping, you know. We had a presentation in our office from the, you know, kind of from the Black and Brown folks called Our Voices, which I was a part of, which I didn't present, but, you know, just them saying, how many of you have ever gone into a room where people just are startled because they didn't expect to see a Black or brown person? Or how many of you have ever been followed in a supermarket? How many of you, you know, as a professional, how many of you have been thought as to be this other thing? And it was really eye-opening. And even now I'm getting goosebumps, because it's like, yeah, these are our colleagues, these are our friends and people we work with, and they're not being treated equally. And what can I do about it? So I know that diversity has become a really hot topic now, but I think as we evolve and keep becoming more self-aware and have this layer of empathy that should be around everything we do, I think it's really going to be a lot better for the next generation. I mean, I can even see it in the young folks in our office where, you know, we are bringing them to meetings and they are not feeling that same way. And that you and I felt like, well, we shouldn't say anything, or, you know, they ask a lot of questions, sometimes too many, but, you know, it's like, I feel like we've empowered the women behind us, and even, you know, men never needed it. No dig, guys, sorry. But we've empowered them to feel like they can speak up and that they are more at the table than probably you and I felt like, so.
I mean, I sort of bullied my way onto tables because it's the endless asking of why has not stopped. I'm like, why would you do that? That was dumb. You shouldn't do that. But I think to your point though, Anna, about like lived experiences, and I want to make this point because I think it's important for people in this industry to hear. It is possible to be a minority and be a bad ally to other minorities, and that sucks. And that's something that we should pay special attention to right now. Historically, like I say this like because I think it needs to be acknowledged. Historically, Asians are bad allies to other POC. There's the myth of the model minority that follows Asians around a lot of the time. And, you know, it has its own terrible repercussions for people of Asian descent, but it also has terrible repercussions for the people who we should be helping and, you know, sort of uplifting as well. And we should, like, I think that's one of those things that you have to watch out for in organizations is clannishness, right? And the tendency to hire, once you accumulate a certain amount of power, to hire people who you recognize and to sort of replicate bad moves further in. So I just want to bring that up because of what Anna said about making it better for the people that come after you. It doesn't mean making it better for the people that come after you who are just like you. Don't do that.
Right. How, you know, like we've talked about it recruiting wise, what other schools do we need to look at? Not just UVA, not just Virginia Tech, Howard, you know, like other HBCUs. How are we going to get that point of view if we're not looking for it?
How are you
going to just
like
hire everybody that wears khakis and, you know, and my husband wears khakis, but, you know, if we're going to just hire the same kind of people everywhere, you're not going to get that point of view. So it's really, you know, I think it's happening. It's just, it's exciting that it's happening, you know, like, you know, at my firm. And so,
but it's happening because of effort, right? And that's like the thing. It's like sustained effort to do it, which is great, but also exhausting.
But
so
we've got the buy-in. Look at, you know, we've got support, you know, and I think that it's really important that, you know, folks like Mari are there, and that, you know, I think we've got the ear of a lot of people, and I think it's not going to be as much of an effort by ourselves as it is with people.
Together. Yeah, that's definitely like a big thing for me, is like, how do you build more togetherness, right? Like, because the other thing that I think comes up too is that, like, when stuff like this happens, the POC in an organization usually bear the brunt of it, right? Like, they're the ones who are telling people, like, don't do that, and eventually it starts to be tough on those people. So especially for like our Black and brown colleagues, you know, taking some of that load and doing the research and doing the work so that they don't have to replicate the work, that's a very important part of learning and working together, I think.
I was in
Thank you.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just saying thank you. This is April. All very good statements that were just made about going to HBCUs, just realizing that, you know, not even just that people of color sometimes not always your advocate, but even women, you know what I'm saying? I really enjoyed the fact that within, you know, our local chapter, all of the women really support each other, and it's genuine. And so there are definitely times in offices where other women are not supportive because of what they went through to get to where they are. And so they kind of pass that down, you know, to others. Instead of making it easier, they continue to make it harder. And so I really enjoy working with all of you all and knowing all of you all, and networking with all of you, just because it's just been a phenomenal experience, and really great talk today. So thank you.
Thanks, April. It's because you're so amazing. We're all trying to work with you.
As I say, we're just at about an hour, but if anybody else has any other.
Yeah,
comments?
Michael, was there something you wanted to follow up on?
I just, one thing I am still learning and was very given the opportunity to observe was there was a panel of women architects. It was specifically talking about gender in this case. And they had different, it was led by a group of women who had sort of come of age when they were the first women, right? So it was like women who were now
Wasn't that long ago?
I know, right? Like a
Like
ridiculously
freaky, like,
short amount of time ago.
Very frighteningly recent.
And so they were just describing their experience and how, like, all the horrible things that happened to them, right? Like people, yeah, all the things, right? And then what was super interesting was to hear generations, like there were sort of mid-career professionals and there were some younger women describe the differences in how they perceived their role shift over time based on like what they thought was possible, right? Like the women who were talking about this panel were describing like how much worse it used to be and how good it is now was very positive. And the younger women were like, it's still bad. Like it's still not where it should be. And it was just a really enlightening conversation for me to listen into, because I just about that, like what you were describing is sort of the discrepancies of experiences specifically with age and generation, and that there's not like a monolithic block of experience. And to find, it was very enlightening for me to listen to, specifically in that context, as how to bridge gaps, how to,
Well, I think that also, you know, like this is why we do this, right? Like so that we can have these talks. But I think the other question is like coming out of this, and this is like a question for me all the time. So I don't know if you guys feel the same way. I'm always trying to figure out like, how do you help it, right? How do you fix it? Obviously, me bullying people has not worked to date. Making demands, not as effective as I thought it was going to be. But, you know, the only strategy that I've ever hit upon kind of in general with clients, with consultants, with other people is like just trying to find ways to offer somebody somewhere else to go, I guess, right? Like there have been times where I've been like, I don't feel like I can help you, but I know this person or I know this place you can go. And I feel like that's something that we sort of have to work into it, is like, how do you do this thing where you're like, I have no power to give you, but I know someone who does, you know? This has come up in our diversity council a little bit, right? Like there have been issues where people have felt uncomfortable with something as we grow and develop and work towards a more equitable future. There are constantly like things where you're like, why would you do that? that is counter to everything that we have discussed. You are not absorbing, right? But having somebody be like, where do I go? I think is like fundamental to a young architect's career. There's so much, where do I go? So I don't know if you guys feel like beyond YAF, beyond AIA, like, or even in AIA, right? Can AIA be the place where someone can say, this is where you go. This is where you start. This is a person you should talk to in a more proactive way. Is the value of having a sort of extracurricular organization that's a professional org, right? Be a connector for a lot of different interests in a proactive way. Thoughts?
Yeah,
Well, I think go ahead, Maury.
I'll jump in. I mean, a good comment, a good question about, once you're beyond, once you, I guess, move away from YAF, what are the next steps? I mean, I think, and Joe and, April, you can certainly touch on this. I think having the AIA be there is the kind of the guidance, the industry representatives and the leaders about, a path. I think that is certainly a logical benefit, of membership, as well as the collegial spirit atmosphere that, begins with, Mardi Gras Day, the social we have in February. I mean, that is the beginnings of that social atmosphere. And, it's wonderful to have, the committee, that Tony and Laura and Simone have been, I think I got that right, have been running to get the young professionals going. But I think it's, to me, as a seasoned, outsider, that looks like a great launch, for a long period of time. But, that should, I would think that would give the young professionals the legs and the confidence to move forward, to then know who to talk to based on having those early introductions and conversations with people. So I think it's a wonderful experience.
I was just going to say that we need to be present in the schools. We need to get them before they're out.
Get them before they're sad.
Before they know what they've gotten into.
Oh no, you never know what you're getting into.
Right. And I think that you can say that you can never be prepared for what's happening. I see that, a lot of times, I'm participating in the mentorship program now, and I just told my mentee, I was like, you're never going to be ready for what they throw at you. And I think Carol, Bricard Rideau said the same thing about, when I've heard her speak too, like she was never ready for the role that she was given. So I think, everybody has this expectation of themselves of what they need to be. And I think one of the things we need to do is we need to be in the schools, and we need to be telling them, it's going to be okay. It's going to be different for everybody, but we can at least prepare them for things. Like I listened into presentation DC did, and it was like get these, show them what an interview is like. Show them how, the first day of onboarding is going to be, and kind of just get people used to like these things that they might not ever know about, and having those kind of just experiences that'll help me kind of boost them and understand like, well, maybe I'm not going to work here, or maybe I'm not going to work here, but I can still understand, like it gives them a little bit more confidence. It can give them the ability to ask more questions, or to understand if this is what they really want, or maybe go into a different direction. But I believe you're right. And, like we need to be resources. We might not know the answer, which I don't know the answer 90% of the time, but I have a network
right.
that I've been working on forever, since I was working at the chapter house with Debbie back in the early 2000s. And, that's my like, my network of people that I know I can go to, and I can direct other people that I know to as well,
But it's like, could you imagine having like a mentorship clearinghouse, right? Like where we could be like, okay, so these senior architects at all levels are interested in offering mentorship, to forming long-term mentorship relationships. These are kind of their fields where they feel comfortable talking, and then you could match people every year to a bunch of people who are interested, and be like, they're not in your firm. It's going to be confidential. It's not like you're going to 360. It's just an opportunity for you to get to know somebody else's experiences that might help you feel like it's going to be okay over the long term. Like that was something I was thinking about even when we were doing 360, right? It's always been group, but there is a value to that individual mentorship. And that's actually the roughest part, I think. So I don't know if you guys feel that way. Like, you know, you think about the people who have made you the professional you are. There's like these key people who hit at these points in your life. Like, how do we be those people to other people?
Just purely as like, so as like an Asian American, you know, I'm the same year as Lada, but I think this is like the first kind of talk that I've seen like other Asian American women.
I am so sorry that this is your first one.
Yeah,
And it was
I mean,
me.
so I think it's like, it's the first time where I've like, I mean, I feel like most other talks, at least this year, I've been like, okay, yeah, I like nod along, and like, yeah, I really resonate. But I think this is the first one where I'm like, yeah, everything is like pretty like spot on. Like, I could see myself in that same situation, sort of thing. So I think just in that sense, it's kind of nice to see like just representation from the get-go. It's like it makes a huge difference.
Well, now you have this community of people. Like
Mhm.
Lauren can connect you to any of us who you want to talk to. I will go ahead and put myself out there. And this is really bad because once again, I think this is going to be on YouTube. Like if people want to talk about what it's like,
Mhm.
I'm always at the ready. I clearly like talking.
Yeah.
Why not talk for good?
But yeah, I mean, I think it's been really helpful. And then like, I was going to say this earlier, but I think another thing is just getting people's names right. Like, so I'm in a Vienna office for Farknexen, and we call into the Virginia Beach office, which is like much bigger. And I mean, I barely ever talk, but then whenever somebody like talks, if they're talking about like some like work that I've done, they always call me Alyssa, and so my name's Elisa. And I mean, I'm just like, I don't like talking unless I have to. But then my boss will always be like, actually, it's Elisa, or like,
Yes, that is
like,
awesome.
I think that's like kind of the bare minimum. Like I'm Thai, so I have a really long last name, and I'm like, I don't expect you to say my last name, and like
I don't know. I kind of feel like you should.
I feel like it's something that I'm like, I don't.
Nah, man, just, you know, don't raise that standard. I mean, like if you can get like some of these crazy French names that we have to
Mhm.
learn in our architectural careers, like if you can get that one out, you can get this one out. I mean,
That's
and
true.
to your point though, my
Mhm.
name, my professional name, like not my legal name, because I had to drop the first part of my legal first name because no one could say it, in like third grade, is 7 letters and it rhymes and people still screw it up.
Yeah. Well,
So,
mine is
you know,
16.
no, man, if somebody can say something like Benedict Cumberbatch, they can totally say your last name.
Yeah. But I mean, it's just like nice to have like kind of positive or like feedback reinforcement, I guess.
Make them say your name. I'm sorry. I mean, I really do believe, I believe that there's this, you know, different things that are going around just for
Mhm.
everyone, you know, about the names, even as African American, you know, just the names that are out there. And yes, we should make people learn our names. I mean, I'll just share a small story where, you know, unfortunately, we started calling one of our structural engineers. We have a lot of Davids in our office. We started calling him Structural David. And so then come to find out that he did not like that. And so it was one day in a conversation we were talking, and it came to light that he did not like being called Structural David. And so basically, we had a little team of people around my desk, and we all learned how to say his last name, and it's LaTroy. You know what I'm saying? And now every time somebody tries to call him Structural David or David, and they kind of hesitate to say his last name, there's a group of us that can teach someone else how to properly pronounce, you know, saying his last name. And so like anytime now someone tries to say Structural, they were like, nope, his name is, and we, you know, saying give him his whole name. So I say make people say your name, you know what I'm saying, and tell people, you know, if they try to give you a nickname, tell people that you don't like it, you know what I'm saying. So ours came out of just because of his first name and us having thousands of other Davids in the office, but why not call him by his whole name instead of, you know, his discipline and his first name. So that's, you know, and us just being mindful of that, being mindful of other people's comfort level. So, you know, and what people may not like, and, you know, at the job. And I think that's really important to take into account as well. So
Yeah, you should always feel like you're seen, like, and that you're seen, and you should be trying to make other people feel seen too, I think. Like, obviously
Mhm.
not like But I think that's like one of the little things, like just like acknowledging and introducing someone, being able to say someone's name. It's just, I think it's okay too. Like, and people always seem to screw this up. It's okay to screw up, right? Like, it's okay to be like, okay, I'm going to struggle with this. Please help me. Like, and I wish people would do that instead of like mangling the 3 letters that comprise my first name. I was like, it's Anne. It's not that hard. They're like, Ain on. And I'm like,
Even old white guys' names get screwed up as well. I don't know how many times I've been called, Mary, going.
well,
So
Mary,
anyway, it's not just,
it is a traditional name.
it's all about a label of what you give to your kids. So
Are you Mary Sanders?
I'll answer to anything. So.
Guy, yeah.
Yeah,
Not
that's
like Joe and April, or Immune or Simone, they never get your name wrong, right?
Oh no, people have thought I'm a guy before, and like I'll show up.
Simon.
Yeah, Simon. And then I'm like, oh hi, I'm Simone. And they're like, oh, okay, hi. And I'm like, yeah, no, I'm a woman. Nice.
Well, that's the one good thing about being named after a month. No one can get it wrong, and it translates into every language. So yeah, there you go. Yeah.
It is funny how foreignness kind of also obfuscates so much other things, right? Like people are like Mr. Antran, like in emails, and I'm like, yeah, ooh, you're in for a shock.
Thanks, Anne, so much. I'm gonna have to hop off in a minute, but I wanted to say really a big thanks to you, and also to Lara and Tony and Simone, because one gift that they've given us here is just introducing us to the people that we already thought we knew. And I'm just, I was sort of laughing nervously during parts because I think you're talking to me about me in a lot of things. So it's,
oh no, I would tell you to your face.
It's, well, I'm sure you probably will still, but and just thinking about, kind of in the search for diversity, I guess it sort of seems like a search, but actually there's a lot of really compelling and interesting things like in the people that we already know. And I thought I knew you, but you're a lot more interesting than what I knew already. So anyway, thanks for sharing with us.
Sorry in advance.
Yeah,
You thought you were boring?
Well, no, I really appreciate you guys inviting me to do this. I mean, it is really tough. Like, I think that's the other thing that gets tough is that when you are considered to be diverse, right, it's even harder to share your own stories. Like, I had a lot of heartburn about talking to you guys about my history. Like, I don't talk about this at work. I don't talk about this with many people. Like, acknowledging certain facts of my life in public is a weird thing to do. Like, so I deeply appreciate you guys forcing me to do this in that sense, right? Like confront it, right? Because hopefully it'll make it better for someone else. And hopefully someone else will feel like their voice isn't alone and that they have this community of people here at AA Nova that welcomes them reaching out and looking to create something better.
Well, like
Our story, and we're glad to hear it.
Like I say, nothing to apologize for at all, Anne. So very good. Thank you for this. I've got to run as well. But thank you for this. Thank you all. Good to talk to everyone, interact with all of
Happy
you.
holidays.
Okay.
Happy holidays. Awesome job, and awesome.
Bye-bye.
Here's to a
Bye.
non-trash fire 2020.